Our next speaker is Bernie Fraser. Bernie is the former Treasury Secretary and former Governor of the Reserve Bank. He has an extensive background in finance, with 25 years in the Commonwealth Public Service, in Treasury and the Department of Finance. He held the position of Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia from 1989 until 1996. He was Secretary to the Treasury from 1984 to 1989 and Director of the National Energy Office from 1981 to 1984. He is currently the Independent Director on the Board of Australian Super, the 1.4 million member industry super fund, a role he has held since 1996. He currently also holds directorships of Members Equity Bank and CBUS, and was formerly the Chairman of the Government Superannuation Office of Victoria. He has received honorary doctorates from the University of New England and Charles Sturt University. He is also an honorary professor of economics at the University of Canberra. Would you welcome Bernie Fraser?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in such distinguished company. I could also mention that I'm of a vintage and a disposition that elicits genuine fondness for he whose naming rights extend to the institute that's organising this conference, which is another reason for my pleasure in being here. I want to offer some necessarily general and personal observations on the evolution of monetary policy in Australia, and to do so in a broad framework which over the years I've come to view all policy making, not just monetary policy. The essence of that framework is that the ultimate goal of policymakers is not to maximise economic growth or minimise inflation, but to help create a better and fairer society. A society which strives, for example, to provide opportunities for everyone to access quality education, health, housing and other basic services. A society which ensures safety nets are in place for those who, often through no fault of their own, are in danger of falling on hard times. A society which provides security, clean environments and so on for all its citizens. Leaders of all political persuasions promise these things and more, but under-deliver on their promises. Even after 2 decades of sustained, robust economic growth in Australia, signs of progress towards a better, fairer society are hard to find. Inequality of income, and therefore of opportunities, have hardly narrowed. Major gaps in economic and social infrastructure remain. Housing is in short supply and expensive, and not just for those increasing numbers of homeless people. And I fear that patients in public aged care facilities could well be the next candidates for a prime ministerial apology. Several points flow from this view of the ultimate goal of policy making. First, the policy task is rather more challenging than the pursuit of other important but essentially intermediate goals, like creating jobs and controlling inflation. The task also is becoming much more taxing. This is the task of this ultimate goal I'm talking about. This is becoming more complicated, more taxing over time, not only with the deregulation and globalisation of financial markets, but for all those additional challenges that Warwick McKibbin has outlined so skillfully. Policymakers therefore need an expanding toolkit, including a significant section reserved for tools to keep working on distributional problems and the need to improve those distributional situations. History shows that favouring business and entrepreneurial groups with preferential policies of one kind or another, in the belief that sufficient benefits will trickle down to other groups, is not the road to a better, fairer society. A second implication is that policymakers should allow and even assist markets to work for them where market mechanisms can help deliver the desired outcomes. Markets do a good job in a number of areas, including, for example, in organising the production and distribution of goods and services that people want and will pay for. These are the relatively straightforward kinds of markets that Adam Smith and others enthused about 200 years ago and which we're all pretty familiar with today. They operate reasonably efficiently and can be supported by regulations to make them more competitive and to protect the health and safety of consumers and those kinds of things. The same cannot be said, however, of some global markets which deal in financial products, which are very different from those other more straightforward products. More generally, markets are more about promoting self-interests rather than community interests. This can make for efficiencies in the allocation of resources, but does little to make for a better, fairer society, a cleaner environment, and so on. These aspirations, if they are to be met at all, require appropriate government interventions. A third, but I think important implication of my ultimate goal framework is that the best balance, the appropriate balance between market forces and government interventions is best pursued pragmatically and not ideologically. Pragmatism to me means reacting to situations in ways which are judged to have the best chance of working. Ideology, on the other hand, whether biased towards the market or towards government, suggests predictable policy behaviours to every situation, whether that action is likely to be working or not. Some powerful groups in the US, for example, can be relied upon to resist almost any proposal, be it for economic stimulus, extended health care, combating climate change, or almost anything involving governments and their ungodly baggage of budget deficits and public debts. So much then for the broad policy framework. It's hardly radical, but for me, the most remarkable feature is the time that it's taken to get there. My stint at the Reserve Bank did help, though, in getting to that point. Making policy and being held accountable for its outcomes, rather than providing advice on policy, certainly concentrates the mind on how best to pursue relevant statutory obligations and to weigh up the sometimes competing interests of different stakeholders. Now, I hope all this background will become a little clearer to you, or its relevance will become a little clearer to you as I start to talk about monetary policy, which I will do now. Next year will mark the 50th anniversary of the Reserve Bank in its present guise. The Reserve Bank was established by an Act of Parliament in 1959 and opened its doors on the 14th of January 1960. Over that time, the landscape surrounding the bank has undergone enormous changes, and monetary policy has had to evolve in response to those changes.